Yo, what is up, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and today I am joined again with my man Noah, who is looking like Patrick Mahomes right now. Huge shout out to Noah for coming back again. Obviously, he does not have to do this, so his link will be in the description. Go check that out and check out him, Nick Ercolano, and Mike Me Up talking about Dynasty as well. You can check that out in the description. I'll link that as well. So in this video, we're going to be talking about a bunch of stuff, but the primary topic of the video is dynasty draft strategy. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is what's the difference between dynasty and redraft strategy. Obviously, it is a completely different game. So, no, what do you think about that?
Yeah, the most obvious difference is you got to take into account the future, right? For example, a guy like Aaron Jones, if you're going to draft him for this upcoming season in redraft leagues, that's going to be a good pick. You know the situation he's in, the offense, right? But if you think about for dynasty purposes, he's only signed through the end of that year. And what was he, like a fourth round pick? That team doesn't really have much of a commitment to bring him back. You might think, oh, they invest through the draft for another cheap running back instead of keeping Aaron Jones, yada, yada, yada. You got to look more so at contracts, age, surrounding situation. Whereas in redraft leagues, all you have to really care about is that season. And that also pushes older guys down the board, like a Julian Edelman, an Adam Thielen, even like a David Johnson. He kind of stinks, so don't draft him. But those guys are going like double-digit rounds, whereas in redraft leagues, they're probably going to be going round 4 or 5 because for the upcoming season, they're going to be extremely valuable. Just dynasty players are a little apprehensive about the future of guys who, hit that 30-year threshold.
Yeah, I also find that looking at the difference in injury between guys, like a guy like Todd Gurley, sure, you might want to draft him this year because he might be fine, but in Dynasty, he might be fucked. His knee is terrible.
Yeah,
Same
those
thing with
knees wear down real quick when you're carrying the ball 300 times a season.
Yeah, same thing with Sony Michel. Don't like his knee either. But all right, that was basically just the main part of that. It's pretty obvious what the differences are, so we're not going to really talk about that. But now we're going to talk about dynasty startup strategy. So even though it's obvious, obviously, guys, you have to check your league settings. I know everyone will tell you that. Every single expert, analyst, whatever you want to call us, will tell you that. But it's something that's very important because your team's going to look completely different if you're playing in a super flex dynasty league or a fucking standard fan or dynasty league
No, those people
PPR.
they don't exist anymore, I don't think.
No, people play standard. You'd be surprised.
Yeah, they're not watching this, hopefully.
Oh yeah, definitely not. I saw some guy who told me that he plays in like a league that's touchdown only. Who the fuck does that?
That's old school. That's when you had to do pen and paper and you could only look at the box score and you see a 1 next to their name and you mark down 6. But yeah, that's tough. That's rough.
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing here is how much does age influence your pick? Obviously, we talked about that a little bit before, but
I think it really depends on the strategy you want to go into the draft with. And that's not to say you should have like a fixed mindset going into the draft that either you want to rebuild or you want to have, a win now team. I think you should let the draft come to you. If value falls to you, take it. For me personally, like a draft I had just done, I wanted to have a team that was probably not going to compete this year or next year, but be like 3-4 years down the line. Just picking young running backs, young receivers, that type of stuff. So for me personally, if you're going to have that fixed mindset and you want to like stay just because like maybe it's an experimental purpose, maybe you want to see how well you can do building a young team or building a win now team, then maybe I take aging into consideration. But at the end of the day, if value falls to you, sometimes you have to change up your strategy. Like me personally, even in that league, when I'm trying to build for the future, Adam Thielen was there in the 10th or 11th round. And I know the guy's 29 or 30, but he's basically been a wide receiver 1 every single time he's laced him up these past 3 seasons. And he's like a young 29. He's been in the league for he's been in the league for a while, but he hasn't really had like a heavy workload past like 4 years ago. So he could be somebody who, I mean, you look at a Julian Edelman, right? At 34 years old, he's still giving you wide receiver 1 numbers. If you just do a little math, 29 minus 34, the other way around, it's not negative, is 5 years. So you can still get a good 5 years of production out of somebody who is seemingly old in the late rounds and just use that, that age to your advantage, even if you're trying to build a young team to pick up guys like an Adam Thielen and a few others. Like I know Kenny Galladay isn't necessarily the youngest young guy in the league. Like people think that he's, 24, 25. I think he's going to be 27 next season. But even then, right, he's in the same like sense as Adam Thielen, who doesn't have a lot of wear on his tires. He's an elite playmaker. He's shown that, and he still probably has 4 or 5 years of extreme dominance left in the tank. So I don't think you should really take age into too much of consideration for wide receivers. As for running backs, I know a lot of guys have good seasons at like age 26, 27, maybe even 28, like in Le'Veon Bell, despite this past season. But for me personally, if it's not like the top 8 or 9 to 10 running backs, like I'm maybe just fading the position as a whole, investing through the draft and trying to trade for like cheap either satellite backs that'll at least give me a good floor throughout this season, whether it's like a Tariq Cohen or Austin Eckler is a little more expensive now, but in the past he was somebody you could pick up, or James White, something like that. But yeah, for me personally, age was only really a factor when it's like a running back and somebody who's had injuries in the past, and you kind of want to shy away from that.
Okay. Now, I don't know if this is a stupid strategy. Obviously, this is going to be my first year playing Dynasty now. We're playing in a super flex league. You're not in it, obviously. But I was thinking about drafting Ryan Fitzmagic really late in the draft. Would you say that that's dumb because he's only going to be there for like a year? Or
I don't think that's dumb at all. I actually did that in my first startup last season. I got him in around like 23, and people were like, "Oh, it's a terrible pick. What's he going to do?" Like, the reason why he was there is because people thought he was a terrible pick. But you look at just opportunity. Getting a starting quarterback in a super flex league, no matter the position or no matter the team or the situation, is a huge leg up on your opponent. If you see your quarterback 4 and he ends up being like what Ryan Fitzpatrick was last year, somebody that you can plug in and put up wide or quarterback 1 numbers, especially playing in the NFC or the AFC East, where basically 2 of the other 3 teams that they play have garbage defense. Actually, no, not for him because he plays the Bills and the Pats. But against the Jets, it's a revenge game. Against the Bills, it's a revenge game. So he has a few good games on his schedule. But even like if a Jacoby Brissett were to start next season, like if you do a later startup draft and you only get him knowing he's got 1 year of starting eligibility, you can get that in the double-digit rounds. That's huge because if he does end up producing, you could kind of swindle somebody and say, hey, maybe he gets signed to a new deal. Maybe he comes back for the Indianapolis Colts and they want to pay him cheap. And you can get a lot in return for somebody who you pick in the double-digit rounds just because they thought he wasn't good or not in a good situation, just because quarterback is such a high advantage over every single position, especially in super flex leagues.
Yeah, exactly. That was my thinking, obviously. But do you think it is a good strategy to match, say, the Dolphins draft Tua? Would you draft Tua and Fitzmagic, or would you just say, fuck it, just draft one of them?
I mean, if Fitzmagic fell to me, I'd be fine taking him, but I'm not all over, loading up on the Miami quarterback
Oh, yeah, obviously
situation.
not.
I mean, that would have hurt if you went with Rosen and Fitzpatrick in drafts. I just think, Fitzpatrick isn't a guy who I'm going to reach for, but if once it comes like round, 15 plus, a lot of those guys don't really have an ADP. It's just like who you like and a guy you want to take a shot on. So if you take him around 17, 18, I mean, I'm fine with it. And if you want to do that to pair those two, so you at least have the Dolphins quarterback matched up, I know you might want to do it because you're a Dolphins fan, but most people I would say maybe don't go into the draft with that being your strategy.
Yeah, obviously not. But I was just wondering if that was like something that people do or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll see this year if it's something that people do, but I don't know. I wouldn't be.
Yeah, I don't want to be too all over these Dolphins players, not looking too hot. So, all right. Now, obviously, you said it's pretty much to pick the best player available. So, do you have any strategy? Have you ever tried to load up on running backs or wide receivers, or are you really just a best player available kind of guy?
Well, I'll typically trade back. I know we'll get to that later, but if you were to trade back, there aren't really that many running backs past, round 3 or early round 4 that I feel confident in having like elite dynasty value from there on. Like even a David Montgomery, who could see, fall into the 5th or 6th round. I don't really have the most confidence in him as a fantasy asset. So me personally, I don't know if I'm going 0 RB. It's just that if I'm not in those first couple of rounds and I can't, lock in a stud who's under contract for a couple of seasons in a good offense, in a good situation, then I might just fade the position as a whole, load up on guys like Allen Robinson, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Lockett, and then post-draft try to work out a trade with other guys who didn't trade back, maybe don't have the depth and only have like those top-end running backs and no receivers to go with it.
That makes a lot of sense because I obviously later we're going to talk about it, but I was going to ask like, does 0 running back or 0 wide receiver work? Because based on what you're saying, I feel like 0 wide receiver wouldn't really work because of how shit the running backs could potentially be.
I think if you load up on early picks and get a lot of running backs and then kind of go like a pseudo 0 receiver and you build through like rounds 9 through 11 and you get those second-year guys like maybe a Deontay Johnson, an Arcega-Whiteside, and Isabella, maybe that works. But my only concern with that whole plan is, and my biggest like takeaway is, you have to build a team that has a consistent window, right? If you build with running backs for the first 2 or 3 rounds, those are guys who are typically, 24, 25, 26 years old, whether it's like Zeke, Kamara, Barkley, like those top end guys. If you're going to build with wide receivers then from rounds like 9 through 12, those are probably going to be first or second year guys. And we all know those guys take, 2 or 3 years to break out, and other than a few anomalies. So if you're going to be drafting those high-end running backs and then those low-end receivers, their primes don't really match up, and you're never really playing to compete, because once those running backs drop off a ledge is when those receivers are going to really start picking up. So I think 0 running back works a lot better, especially if you want to take shots on younger running backs like maybe a Justice Hill or Gus Edwards. You just want to lock up somebody in that Baltimore backfield. and then have a lot of elite receivers who have that longer shelf life. So even if it takes a long time for those running backs to break out, there's a good chance that your receivers will still be in their prime or at least near that window for your team to be really correlated to, winning games.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I know in a lot of regular leagues, redraft leagues, a lot of people typically wait on the quarterback and tight end position. First, we'll talk about the tight end. So what do you typically do in the draft when you're looking and startup when you're looking for a tight end? Because I know you'll see Kelsey go off potentially early. Is it really worth it to invest in a guy like that? Or would you rather just punt the position, which is what most people do in redraft type of leagues, and try to find that diamond in the rough?
Yeah, for redraft leagues, I definitely mostly punt the position just because I think the positional advantage, unless you get those top 2 or 3 guys, isn't necessarily there. Mm-hmm. For Dynasty, I play in premium leagues, so those guys have a little more value, especially the top-end guys like a Kittle or a Kelsey are basically, elite wide receiver ones for the entire season at a thin position, so it's a huge advantage there. As for non-tight end premium leagues, I mean, there's only a few tight ends you can really rely on year after year. I would honestly, if you don't get, a Kelsey, a Kittle, throw Hunter Henry in there, Mark Andrews, a couple others, maybe a Waller, Austin Hooper. Like if you don't get any of those type of guys, maybe just punt the position, get a TJ Hawkinson or Noah Fant a bit later, who I know Fant had a pretty good rookie season, all things considered, but a Hawkinson, he's a guy who was basically a first-round rookie pick in tight end premium leagues. Even not in tight end premium leagues, he was seen to be like the next Gronk. He didn't really live up to the hype. His quarterback got his back blown out. Hawkinson got hurt every other game, so he's somebody you can probably pick up near the double-digit rounds, like a Jonnu Smith, maybe an Ian Thomas with Greg Olsen now gone. Just maybe take a bunch of shots on younger tight ends that have the opportunity and are in decent enough situations to be able to produce rather than spend high draft capital on a Hunter Henry who also seems to find himself in the IR every other season.
Yeah, they got to pay him some big bucks over there. As a Charger fan, obviously you know that.
Yeah, that's going to be tough.
Yeah, now Ian Thomas, obviously, he's a guy that a lot of people, I think, are going to be hawking onto because I saw last year a lot of people would pick him up, and he played pretty well when Greg Olsen was out. Now, do you really think that he's going to be someone who's potentially the future of the Panthers or no?
Well, not really because they got McCaffrey, Curtis Samuel, and DJ Moore, so they're really built around a young core and a bunch of guys who are going to be eating up a lot of targets. I don't think he's going to cement himself in the offense the same way that Greg Olsen had. That's not to say he's going to be a bad player. I just don't think he'll ever reach that like top 5, top 10, like locked in upside week after week. He could just be like a solid enough floor play. I was going to say like a Charles Clay when he was back in Buffalo Bills. Buffalo Bills. So like not a great player, but somebody I guess you can rely on during a bye week. But yeah, I'm not actively trying to overpay to acquire Ian Thomas.
Okay. I was just wondering. Now, obviously, like I said, the quarterback position as well in redraft leagues, most people like myself, they love Josh Allen. They love Dak Prescott. Guys like that you can find super far back in the draft. Now, if you're not a super flex, we'll talk about super flex next. What do you do with the quarterback position as well?
In a one quarterback league?
Yeah, if we're talking right, and then we'll talk super flex after. Yeah.
Honestly, I've never played in a one quarterback dynasty league.
Oh, okay.
I like listen to podcasts where like Joe Burrow in a startup is going late round 2, and that just doesn't make sense in my brain to me. So I'm not the best one to ask about one quarterback leagues. I assume it's kind of similar to redraft one quarterback leagues, which I do play in, where you can wait on a guy like a Josh Allen late. You can wait on a Jimmy Garoppolo late. So honestly, my first impression would be probably just wait on the position because not many teams in Superflex you're rostering 3 to 4 quarterbacks, like 2 starters, maybe 3 at best. So I assume for a one quarterback league, guys are rostering 2 to 3. With probably just 2 starters. So you can probably wait on the position and get somebody a little bit later.
Okay. So in Superflex, obviously you think taking them earlier is obviously advantageous because otherwise you're going to be fucked if you wait a while.
Yeah, you have to because not only do they go early, but them going early pushes value down the board. Like you can get an Allen Robinson, a Cooper Kupp. As I said, I think I used all 3 examples before. Tyler Lockett, those guys in the 6th, 7th, or 8th round, like they get pushed down so far down the board because those quarterbacks are being taken in the early rounds, especially if you want to add in like tight end premium to it. There's so much value on the board later on that pre-draft you may not think a 7th or 8th round pick is valuable, but when you're in the heat of things and you see that all these elite players are falling down the boards because somebody wants to take Matthew Stafford and his back brace in the 5th round. I mean, it's easy to capitalize when you just wait on those picks, but yeah, certainly when you're in a super flex league, within the first 4 or 5 rounds, if you have those picks, you have to grab a quarterback because after that, round 6, round 7, you're kind of in QB wasteland and you're trying to take shots on Drew Brees, who might not even play next year, or Tom Brady, who's spending more time taking like pictures in tunnels and throwing passes to his receivers. So, Yeah.
Exactly. Got to be a bit mysterious. Now, in Dynasty for Superflex, who would be your number one quarterback like ranked? Is it Lamar or is it Pat Mahomes? Because if I'm being honest with you, I think I'd be more in the Pat Mahomes type of boat. I have the second overall pick in the Dynasty League I'm doing. And I'm thinking about taking Pat Mahomes. So
Yeah, that's why I wore the headband. It's a tribute to Patrick Mahomes. I mean, I know Lamar Jackson was incredible this year, right? And he can do it with both his legs and his arm, but the efficiency numbers, we even saw Mahomes this year. His touchdown percentage went down drastically, but he was
mhm.
still very efficient because he's a great quarterback. Lamar Jackson led the league, I believe, in touchdown pass percentage. He's obviously running like a maniac. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, he's going to get hurt running the way he does because he does avoid contact for the most part. But I just think the shelf life of a quarterback who runs when he needs to instead of that being an essential part of his game and has shown that he can do it with just his arm. And now in the playoffs, we've seen these past couple of weeks him running for like 50, 60, 70 yards, and we know that's in his bag. So going forward, if he wants to use that more, that's just going to, inflate his floor that he already has. We've already seen the ceiling, him be the quarterback one, throw like 50-something touchdowns in a season. So, yeah, he would be my QB1 just because I feel like I can trust him year after year a little bit better. His weapons there are incredible, and we know that they're going to be there for a pretty long time. He's in a great offensive system. So, and with Ward, I'm not sure what like Greg Roman's doing, whether he's leaving the team, he's going to be a coach somewhere else, whatever. But there's a little bit more up in the air, in my opinion, about Lamar Jackson than there is with Patrick Mahomes. So
Yeah,
I think we've seen enough out of him for him to warrant the 101.
yeah, definitely. I think if he didn't get hurt this year, he would have been not necessarily up there with Lamar Jackson, but kind of close, I would think, if he hadn't gotten
Yeah,
hurt.
basically everything went right for Lamar, and he capitalized. You can't knock him for that. But like a lot of things went wrong for Mahomes, and I think he still threw like 26 touchdowns, which is a pretty good mark.
Yeah, he was looking really good. He was looking very strong to start the year.
hmm
Just like Sammy Watkins. Fuck Sammy Watkins. Just a little insult there for him. But obviously now here we're going to talk about some trade tips. Now I've never really played in Dynasty, so I've just read these things. I've heard these things from other people. Now, just like you said, a lot of people believe that it's easier to kind of trade down. It's better to trade down than try to go up. Now, why is that?
I think because people, at least pre-draft, people see, the first round pick and they're like, oh, there's going to be so much value there. There's going to be so many great players. I'll trade up from, I'll try to move up my like a fifth, fourth, and a third to get a first. When in reality, when you're on the draft board, you realize that there's a lot more value than you may think in like the fifth or sixth round, right?
Mhm.
From picks like 108 to the end of the second round, there really isn't much of a drop off between who you're getting. It's basically the difference between like a DeAndre Hopkins and a Chris Godwin, or I know Devontae Adams is probably a little bit before Godwin and a little bit after Hopkins, but the disparity between those players really doesn't warrant you having to move up from a late second to an early second, and to do that giving up a fifth round pick. When like if you think about the trade after the draft and you look back what you traded, if you were to trade up from round 2 to round 1 and giving up a fifth round pick in return, the package might end up being like Stephon Diggs and Chris Godwin for DeAndre Hopkins. And I'm taking the former every single time because there's so much value there. So I think it's definitely easier to trade back, I think, pre-draft, and then during the draft, people want to trade back because they see actually what's going on, and the fact that, rounds 5 through 8, those mid rounds, is actually a lot of value there. And they realize that having an early pick isn't all what it's, all what it seems to be going into the draft. So if you want to trade up, I'd say during the draft it might be easier because more people are willing to sell those picks.
Mhm.
And if you want to trade back, I don't even know. I think you got to play it by ear. You got to know who your league mates are, whether they want to build a top heavy team with a bunch of studs, or they want to build through the mid rounds, which that's what I personally do. I buy a lot of my picks pre-draft, when you should probably buy them more during the draft because people are more willing to sell when they see what's on the board.
Okay. Now, Scott was telling me that he thinks that a good strategy is trading your picks during the draft and trying to acquire picks for the rookie draft, like over the next couple of years. Do you find that to be a good strategy?
As for like this year's rookie draft, the value of those picks go up astronomically once either the startup is over or as the draft comes along or after the actual NFL draft happens, so you know where those guys land. But if Scott means like for the future, like a 2021 pick, I think you should be buying those now because people just see those as nothing more than like trade chips, when in a year from now, they're probably going to be valued just as highly as a 2020 first is, which in startup value, I'd say like a top 5 pick in the rookie draft is basically, a round 3 pick in startup. Whereas a top 5 pick in the 2021 class is probably valued at like a round 10 cost right now. So if you're building for the future, I would definitely try to acquire 2021 first. Even if you're not building for the future, they're super cheap. You can probably send like during the season, just send somebody like maybe an Adam Thielen for a 2021 first, because somebody might want that instant production this season to win the chip, and you can build for the future with an early to mid first, when at the time it doesn't really seem like it has too much value because it's so far away. But in Dynasty, you always have to be thinking about the future.
Okay, now that makes a lot of sense. That's pretty much what Scott was trying to tell me there too. You just worded it way better than I could.
Thank you, I guess. I'm a wordsmith. That's why you bring me on here.
Okay, so now do you prefer to have the startup draft include rookies, or to be a completely different rookie draft, like if you're doing your startup?
I prefer a completely different one. I know the way we set up the forum didn't really cater to that. I just think it's more interesting trading not players, but trading picks, right? Because if rookies are included in your startup draft, you're actually trading the person that's there. Like if you had already made the selection, you choose a CeeDee Lamb in the 5th round and you want to trade him after, instead of trading like a 2020 105 in the rookie draft, you're actually trading who he actually is. So I think it leaves a lot more flexibility, and it leaves a lot more like unknown, which I think is more fun, because instead of, as I just said, like instead of trading somebody that's actually there, you're trading, oh, maybe he doesn't take CeeDee Lamb at the 105, maybe he takes something else. But I think you can also get a little bit more value from it, because if you think about it, right, and you have like CeeDee Lamb on the board and you have Stephon Diggs on the board, you're probably going Stephon Diggs. But if it's like the 105 or a 5th round pick where Stephon Diggs would go, people might prefer the 105, when in reality that 105 is going to turn into CeeDee Lamb, and that 5th round is Stephon Diggs. So I think it leaves a lot more like mystery up to it, I guess, which makes it a little bit more interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm seeing a lot of people this year telling me that this is one of the greatest classes to ever come out of college. Now,
year, and then it all of a sudden drops off 2 days later.
Yeah, exactly. Do you feel like this is a great class, or are you just like indifferent? Like it's okay?
I think it's very good. I mean, compared to last year, right, I wasn't too high on the running backs. Like I wasn't a Miles Sanders fan at all heading into last year, like watching him on tape, and he's obviously proved me wrong. He's very good, but other than, Sanders, Jacobs, and maybe Singletary, there's not much in way of running backs. Wide receivers, they all did incredible this past year. But looking at this class, right, I think the running backs are extremely deep, probably twice as deep as it was last season. And that's not like hyperbole. I think there's legit 4, 5, or 6 guys who, during their rookie seasons can be actual fantasy assets, not only in Dynasty, but in Redraft. As for receivers, I don't know. There's a bunch of guys I'm iffy on. I think that the elite of the elite, there's probably 3 or 4 guys I think are going to be extremely valuable and on par with some of the top guys this past year. But after that, I think it's just a bunch of wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3s, not fantasy value, but like on their own team, which then for fantasy value makes them like wide receiver 3s or wide receiver 4s. I could be completely wrong, but I think the hype, especially with more guys going back, like a Tylan Wallace is somebody I was excited about. He's going back. As for running backs, even ETN, Najee Harris, Hubbard, a lot of guys went back, which kind of hurt the depth of the class. I still think it's a really good class. I just don't think it's necessarily generational, because if you said a class was generational, people say that every year, then a generation becomes 1 year, which is kind of stupid. But I don't think it's as the wide receiver class is as deep as last year. The running backs definitely are. The top 2 quarterbacks definitely are. And as for tight ends, I don't really know much about any of them. They all seem to be like smaller school guys. So we'll see how they test athletically and where they go in the draft to really cement my opinion on them.
All right. Now, I think that obviously a lot of people will tell you that trading for a wide receiver after their first year, say they suck the first year, which a lot of rookies do. Now, do you think that trading for them for their 2nd or 3rd year, a guy like JJ Arcega-Whiteside, or however you say that guy's name, is that an ideal thing that you look to do?
A lot of people I realize don't want to sell those guys if they pick them in rookie drafts or even in the startup if they picked them. I think that they kind of hold on to them knowing like I picked them so high they have to at least break out. And the person buying them is buying them because they think that they're going to break out as well. So it doesn't really allow you to pay the price that the person wants for them. If somebody's selling low and thinking that they're going to like be terrible, I know JJ Arcega-Whiteside isn't necessarily the same as Harry, because Harry was basically the consensus 101, whereas Arcega-Whiteside was, a fringe 1st round pick, maybe like a mid 2nd round pick. So he's probably going to be easier to acquire. But for me personally, when you look at those guys' profiles, I wrote up an article about it, how their breakout age and their dominator and their athleticism kind of correlates to success in the NFL. All those guys check basically every single box. They just didn't produce their rookie year, whether it be injury or just like Arcega-Whiteside, he could have produced. He had every like opportunity to, and he just never did. And people are going to write him off for the future because of that. But there's been so many situations I brought up earlier, not early in this video, but I brought up before, but like BJ Chark in his rookie year, he had nothing to compete with. He didn't do anything. Tyler Boyd, all he had to like compete with in his first 2 seasons was Brandon LaFell. He did nothing. It's like, just because you don't do well right off the bat, going from playing in the Pac-12 to facing actual legit NFL cornerbacks every single week at the age of 21 doesn't mean you're going to be garbage for the rest of your career. These guys have, a couple years to develop and really understand the game. So yeah, JJ Arcega-Whiteside is somebody I'm buying. Another guy like Andy Isabella, a guy who had a lot of hype and just didn't, wasn't able to get on the field too consistently to start off his career. Like, you just got to realize these guys are super young. Some guys are a little bit more raw than others, and it's going to take a few years for them to produce. Even like a Cortland Sutton, right? He didn't even play wide receiver either going into college or during his college career. Like, he was a free safety. He moved to receiver. He was extremely raw. His first season, you would have thought he was a bust because he didn't do too well. Then he comes out this year and he's basically a wide receiver 1. You just can't give up on these guys because they weren't, the best at their position on their team when they just entered the league.
Yeah. Now, I know this is kind of off of Dynasty, but do you think that Corey Davis will ever turn it on? Because I don't think so. That guy fucking sucks.
I don't know. I think he was touched by an angel, and that angel was Marcus Mariota, and that angel was actually a devil because everything he touches just goes to shit, except for like Delaney Walker. I think he was just too old to deal with Marcus Mariota shenanigans, so he just produced either way. But I think his development was definitely hindered by having to catch passes from the Hawaiian Brett Hundley. So I think after this year, when he's a free agent, he might move to a new team and find greener pastures than what he saw in Tennessee for his first 3 or 4 seasons. And if we think back to not this year, but the year prior, right? I think he had like almost 900 yards, like 6 touchdowns, playing with terrible quarterback play on a team that wants to run the ball. So he definitely has the ability to be a fantasy viable receiver. I'm not sure it's going to be in Tennessee. I'm not sure it's going to be this upcoming year, but I don't think he's a terrible football player, right? He was like the 6th overall pick, but he came out of a small school, so obviously he looked good playing against those frauds. But I don't think his career is necessarily over yet. He like just turned 25.
Yeah.
He gets a second contract on a team that wants to use him as a wide receiver too. I could see him, returning a little bit of value, and he looked decent enough in the playoffs for Tannehill down the stretch. He like outproduced AJ Brown in the playoff games, but they also were throwing the ball like 12 times a game, so you can't weigh that too heavily.
Yeah, I think the problem with Corey Davis was that he just like was getting so many targets and not catching them with Mariota that really just fucked everyone's perception up of him. I still don't think he's that good, but maybe it's just from that.
A lot of those targets were probably hitting the ground before they hit his hand, so
yeah, Mariota.
I can't put that all on him.
Yeah, Mariota's Hawaiian descent kind of worries me about Tua,
I think Tua is Samoan, so I don't think there's
maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe he's like The Rock then. I think The Rock is Samoan.
He had a pretty good career. He
Yeah.
had 2 good careers, acting and WWE.
Exactly. Now, we're going to switch up here. Now, we're going to talk about buy or sell. Now, these are guys that I think that some people like you may like them or you may hate them. Some people have strong opinions on these guys. So what do you think about Baker Mayfield?
This is funny because this week's video is going to be around a lot of these guys that we're going to talk about. Baker Mayfield, I don't know. If somebody's selling him, I'm probably just buying him if it's a super flex league. If it's a 1 QB league, I'm probably just not interested. I don't think you can go from being that good and looking that elite to being that bad, like while gaining more weapons without some other variable being there. And I think that variable has to be Freddie Kitchens because basically everybody but Jarvis Landry took a step back. And I know Nick Chubb had a good year, but he was having a great year the year prior also. So I don't think Freddie Kitchens like inflated him and made him a better player. I think with Freddie Kitchens now out of there, Baker's going to have an offseason to prepare with that entire offense. I know he's looking a little thick right now, so but it's the offseason. You got to let these players loosen up a bit. I think he's going to be pretty solid next year, right? I mean, he never really got in his groove this season. I know he had a few easy matchups down the stretch, and he did pretty well in them. But you got to think if Odell stays there with Jarvis Landry, with Nick Chubb, if Kareem Hunt gets brought back, if he's even in the league next year, there's just too many weapons there, and we've already seen his upside that I don't think he's going to flop and not be fantasy relevant ever again. And in Dynasty, you got to buy that because he's still a young quarterback who, has the upside we've seen as a quarterback 1.
All right, so we just talked about Baker, who's on the Browns. And we're talking about some other Browns here. What do you think about Odell?
I don't know. I still like him. I think he's still awesome. You see like a few flashes this year when he was actually given the ball that he can make plays. It's just the inconsistency of getting the ball. But again, it goes back to Freddie Kitchens. I don't think that guy was made to be a head coach. They wouldn't let Todd Monken like do anything despite him being like the quarterback and wide receiver whisperer in Tampa Bay. So I think if they switch things up a bit, air the ball out a little bit more to those guys, Odell's going to return more value than he did this past season. But I'm not so sure I'm buying Odell because the person that has him still sees those three letters, those O and B and J, and they're not going to want to move him for cheap. So if I have him, I'm probably just holding, which means he's neither like a buy or sell because his price is probably too high for what somebody isn't going to pay for him. So you can't really move him at this price.
All right, now the last Brown we're going to speak about here is Kareem Hunt. Now, obviously, that man needs to stay off the weed, as Stephen A. Smith would say. But what do you think is going to happen with him? Because I think he might get moved. He might move teams. But what is your opinion on him like right now? If you had to like buy him or sell him, what would you do?
I'm not an expert on NFL contracts, but he's a restricted free agent this year, and I heard they only need to pay like $3.5 million to keep him. So if he doesn't get in any legal trouble or anything, I don't see how they don't bring him back for that price. If he does and the team cuts him like they did with Josh Gordon and they just don't pay him, I think either way he's a buy candidate because right now his price is so low because people are worried about his off-field antics and whether or not he goes back to the Browns. But when he was on the field this past year, he was basically like James White plus. And if he lands anywhere else, he's going to be a running back one. There's obviously the risk of him never playing again, which is, it's tough. But if you have to throw like a third-round rookie pick at him or just package that with a low-end player, I do that 100% of the time because the upside greatly outweighs the downside there. If he never plays again, I'll take that risk because the other side of that risk is getting a running back one or getting, a mid-end running back two if he stays with Cleveland.
Yeah, I agree with that. I really like Kareem Hunt, even redraft Dynasty. I think that next year is going to be great if he stays on the Browns. Obviously, we saw last year he was suspended. I don't even know how many games. It was like 10 or something. But he played great when he was on the field. So I think that this year and for the future, if they keep him, or even no matter where he goes, I think he'll be an asset for the team. Unless he goes to Houston like Duke Johnson and they just decide not to use him.
Yeah, I think that's where like all Browns running back go to die. Actually, Carlos Hyde did pretty well this year, so maybe not.
Yeah. Maybe not. Carlos Hyde wiped his ass at the Jets and threw the ball at him, if you remember that. That shit was so funny. Now, what do you think about Juju? Now, Juju's a guy that a lot of people have strong opinions on him. Antonio Brown hates him, and now Antonio Brown loves him. He was talking about how he loves him and Lev Bell. Now, what do you think about Juju? Do you love him like Antonio Brown?
I think Antonio Brown loves and hates every single person on this planet, so I'm not taking his opinion into too much consideration. As for Juju, it's tough. I think to say that he didn't produce this year while Deontay Johnson and James Washington produced, and that shows that Juju isn't a great receiver, isn't the best argument because he was dealing with so many injuries. I think it was a toe and like a core injury. It's like random injuries, or maybe it was even a knee. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't really keep too much up to date on it other than whether or not the player is playing. But he had to go through a lot, right? He switched quarterbacks. He probably was never catching passes from Mason Rudolph or Duck Hodges in practice because he was always running with the ones. Then he gets injured. It was just an up and down season for him. It was still like decent, all things considered. Over the first 3 weeks, I think he went over like 80 yards twice. He had a touchdown in that span. So it's not like he was never good. I think just too much changed up there. And that team really got like a solid, top 5 defense towards the middle end of the season when they got Minkah Fitzpatrick. So they wanted to pound the rock a lot with like Benny Snell, who averaged 2 yards a carry. But going forward, like Juju Smith-Schuster, I think he's still like 22 or 23 years old. He is super young. Big Ben looks like he's coming back next year. If they can sort out the quarterback position behind him, maybe in this draft get Jordan Love or Jacob Eason late, maybe I'd be interested in paying the price for him. But I still think just like Odell, he's going to have that hefty price tag on him just because we know that he's young. We know he's produced in the past. That I'm not so sure I'd be willing to pay the price it's going to take to get him. Mm-hmm. But if somebody is selling in your league, he's somebody I would buy just because the upside is way too great for somebody that young, and we've already seen him be a wide receiver one and put up like 1,400 yards as a 21-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like Juju as well. I'm just worried about more of the future now. Obviously, how long do you think Big Ben could play? That's the real question. Do you think next year is his last year? And then what do they do with the quarterback position? Do they keep Duck? Do they keep all these other trash motherfuckers? Like, they need to draft someone, obviously.
Yeah, whatever they have behind Big Ben isn't going to work right now. And, Big Ben wasn't terrible to start the year. And I don't know, last year in 2018, he was very good as well. So if Big Ben can stay around for 1 to 2 more years, I think that'll definitely help Juju and whoever they draft at quarterback, if they do draft anybody or if they trade for somebody sitting behind Ben, would definitely be beneficial for them as well.
Now, obviously, Juju's teammate James Conner is also a topic of debate. A lot of people like him. A lot of people hate him. I've noticed, at least. I really liked him. A lot of people hated him. They hated on me where I picked him, and they were probably fucking right because he's a glass cannon. He gets hurt every 6 seconds. Now, what is your opinion on him? Do you think that he could be good for the future? Would you buy him? Would you sell him? Or would you just not even go anywhere near him?
I would sell him if I have him. He's never shown that he can stay healthy. He's never been able to stay on the field for an entire season. I think he's ended almost every single season either on the IR or just injured. He just can't finish the season. And I don't think that the Steelers, whose identity for forever, for as long as I can remember, is to run the ball with like one running back 300 times a season. Yeah. I'm not so sure he's the answer for that. There's so many running backs in this class that I think, second, third round, if they have a pick in those rounds, they're just going to invest through there. I mean, we saw even when Benny Snell was out there, a late round pick guy who isn't athletic, isn't a pass catcher, down the stretch, he was getting a ton of carries just because that's what Pittsburgh's identity is. So I think that they'd want to bring in somebody that they can trust a little bit more. And maybe they relegate James Conner to that Jalen Samuels role, more of a pass catcher, because he is good in that facet of the game. He probably wouldn't get as banged up if he's not running between the tackles as much. But if I have him, I'm probably selling him. And I might just sell low on him because for dynasty purposes, I don't see him having too much more value going forward.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know what it is with the Pittsburgh coaching, but even Snell, like you said, he was getting a lot of touches. He was still looking good in a lot of those games.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it might be the offensive line play because for as long as I can remember, they always dominate the trenches, even with Willie Parker. That dude would just run for miles just because they would open up huge holes for them. But yeah, it's probably something with the coaching or the run blocking on that team because no matter who they put back there, they do really well. Even like a 35-year-old D'Angelo Williams a few years ago.
That's what I was going to bring up. Yeah, I drafted him in a lot of redraft leagues. He paid off for 3 days or 3 weeks, I should say. Now, what is your opinion on a guy like Kerryon Johnson, a guy who's also, just like James Conner, really can't finish the season, seems to be an injury-prone kind of guy, but when he's on the field, seems to be great. Now, he's obviously hindered by the fact that Matt Patricia and his pencil in the ear seems to be a bit of an idiot. So what do you think about that?
I would sell him as well. I wouldn't sell him right now because his value is a bit low. I'd probably wait till the beginning of the season. Hopefully he's healthy to start the year, but he's another guy who's just never been able to string any games together, at least in the NFL. And the other thing is, like, Detroit, I think it was with Bo Scarborough. It was like the first time a running back had taken 20 carries and since like 2012. It was like some ridiculous stat that they just don't feed their top guy. I know Kerryon Johnson's a good pass catcher, but they just haven't shown any commitment to get him consistently involved in the passing game. Like, if we remember to the preseason this past year when the Seattle Seahawks were talking about Chris Carson, they're like, we want to get him 50 targets. Guess what? They got him 50 targets. Kerryon Johnson, they don't make any type of, they don't make it a goal of theirs to get him 60, 70, 80 targets when he could be a guy that can handle that type of workload. So I don't think the upside is necessarily as high as many people may think. And I think the downside is just him sustaining a bunch of injuries. So I'd probably wait till the beginning of the season because he is a very good football player. When he's on the field, he looks great. He'll probably have a few good games to start the year, and I'd probably just try to ship him off there because he is young, but the offense he's in I don't think really does him any justice, and you can probably just ship him off for somebody of similar value at the same position or a rookie pick if you want to try to rebuild that way.
Now, I know you talked about David Montgomery earlier. So based on your opinion, I think, to me, in my opinion, what you were saying, he would be a sell to you. Now, do you think that David Montgomery could ever turn it around? Because I think it's the coaching issues there. I think they need to give him the rock more, but obviously the coaching issue, if they keep Nagy, it'll be the same shit.
Yeah, I don't think it's – most of the time for running backs, it's never really the running back's problem because running back is such a dependent position, whether it be on coaching or offensive line play, that – you can't really just pinpoint and say this guy's a terrible running back unless you're looking at Trent Richardson because that guy stunk. But for David Montgomery, you watch the dude play. He's pretty good. He has good hands. He's elusive. He's not the fastest guy, but he picks up the yards you need him to gain. I just think their offensive line is completely trashed. I'm pretty sure one of the Long brothers, whichever one's there, Kyle Long, did he just retire? So they're losing pieces to this offensive line. The coaching is obviously terrible. Mitchell Trubisky, he's a free agent after this year, but who knows? It looks like that they think that he's their guy, which I'm not sure that's the answer. There's just too many unknowns, and what we do know isn't good, so I wouldn't hold on to David Montgomery if I have him.
Okay, now the final part here for the buy or sell. Obviously, Kyler Murray is worth a shit ton. Would you pay the price for Kyler Murray, or do you think the fact that he's like 5'6", he might eventually just get hurt or something?
No, I'd pay the iron price for him. I think he's honestly, like, not even hyperbole, I think he's a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. And that might be very controversial, but when you watch him play, he can make any throw on the field. He has a great arm. He can put it deep. He can put it short. He can run. He didn't necessarily show that too much this past year. And over the first 3 or 4 weeks, he wasn't using his legs at all. But when he started to run, it was very hard for defenses to stop him. And that was with, a 36-year-old wide receiver being his wide receiver one when Christian Kirk was down. Christian Kirk dealt with a bunch of injuries this year. I know that offense doesn't really use a tight end, but they had no tight end of consequence. The running back situation was a debacle till they brought in Kenyan Drake. And then Kenyan Drake did very well, but it wasn't necessarily through the passing game. It was on the ground a lot. So nothing really went Kyler Murray's way. And he was still a quarterback one in a ton of games. And I think the upside is immense for him. He could basically be, I know this sounds crazy, but like a Russell Wilson for fantasy purposes, just somebody that gets you, 5, 6, 700 rushing yards, which is more than like Wilson ever got you, while still throwing for, close to 4,000 yards, which is what he did this year. He's like one of 8 quarterbacks to ever throw for 3,500 and run for 500 in a season. And that's not just rookies. That's like ever for like any time in somebody's career. So I think the upside is there. As for one quarterback leagues, I'm never overpaying for any type of quarterback. But if it's a super flex league, I would pay basically whatever it takes to get him if you're desperate at the quarterback position, because I just have so much belief in him.
That makes a lot of sense. The coaching there seems to be good, and it's just that they didn't have the players this year to really succeed. I didn't think their line was all that good, but I do think for the future he could be amazing if they, like a guy like Andy Isabella becomes really good. That could be something for him for the future.
Yeah, and it looks like they're going to probably invest in a wide receiver, at least in these mock drafts. They keep projecting CeeDee Lamb to go there, but even if they don't go for him, they get like a Bryan Edwards later or like a T. Higgins or something like later in the draft. They just need more bodies on the outside that can actually, catch passes. And if they do that, the sky's the limit for him. And as for the offensive line, it is awful. And he doesn't have a lot of time to throw. But I think with somebody with his athleticism, doesn't even really need a great offensive line to be good. He can create for himself, just like Russell Wilson. All those years, his offensive line, I know recently it's gotten like a lot better, but all those years where it was terrible, he was still a quarterback one because he can improvise. And not to say that's better for him, because, defenses, once plays are extended, they kind of don't know where the receivers are going. That's where we saw a lot of Doug Baldwin and like Tyler Lockett's value came from. But Kyler Murray, his ability to extend plays just only helps his fantasy upside because, creates for those chunk yardage gains when they do connect on those deep plays, when the cornerback gets lost, when he's running around in the backfield for like 15 seconds. You can't even see if he's still standing because he's 5'2".
Exactly. I don't even know how he sees over the line.
Because he doesn't have a line. That's why.
Exactly. He just fucking jumps up repeatedly. And now, obviously, this is going to be another part here. So what are your opinions like on guys versus the rookie draft picks like for this year? So would you rather have Joe Mixon or the 102?
Super flex or one quarterback?
Let's do one quarterback. Let's say give me an answer for both.
All right. It's going to be Joe Mixon either way, really. Joe Mixon is probably better, in my opinion, definitely better than any running back in this class, any receiver in this class. As for Superflex, it gets a little bit closer because that's basically Tua or Joe Mixon, but I would just rather Joe Mixon. There's still some question marks there in terms of, how their offense is going to produce, but I think Tua has too many question marks in terms of where he's going to land, because the only guy whose landing spot we know at this point is Joe Burrow. Tua could be a backup for 1, 2, or 3 years, depending on where he lands. So I think I'd just rather Joe Mixon, knowing he's probably going to be a running back one for the foreseeable future. I
agree. I love fucking Joe Mixon. I loved him this year, and he just didn't perform. But I think with Joe Burrow coming there and the coaching, I mean, obviously it wasn't amazing last year, but I think obviously with AJ Green coming back, they could be a very good team next year.
Yeah, I'm high on Joe Mixon going into 2020.
All right. Now, another guy I'd like to talk about here, Josh Jacobs or the 102.
One quarterback league, I'll take Josh Jacobs. I think the only running back I like better than him in this class is DeAndre Swift. I like him better than Jonathan Taylor and the rest of those guys. Superflex, I'd take the 102 at that price or at that point. Okay. Now, the other two guys I was going to ask about, obviously, I know you're going to obviously take the 106 or the 107 for these guys, which is Kerryon Johnson or David Montgomery. It seems like you hate both of those guys. So that's kind of for running backs in this class, I would definitely take the top 4 guys over Kerryon Johnson. And then if it's a one quarterback league, those 4 plus the other 2 receivers, like if you like CeeDee Lamb or Judy, I like Reger personally. I would take any one of those 6 over Kerryon. And as for David Montgomery, I would take those 6 plus, Reger or Judy over David Montgomery. So I would prefer the 107 over David Montgomery. All right. Now, this part is not really based on Dynasty. I guess it kind of is based on Dynasty. It's based more on football. Where do you think that Kerryon Johnson will land? Now, a lot of people are saying they'll just keep David Johnson. Drake, right? Yeah, Kenyan Drake. Is that what I said? I might have said the wrong. You said Kerryon Johnson. I was about to say Kerryon Johnson's probably going to land on the IR. No. Oh, yeah, that's true. Kenyan Drake, though, is what I meant to say. Do you think that he will move off of Arizona? Do you think he'll stay there? Because if David Johnson is still there, I'm very worried
for Kenyan Drake?
Yeah, I don't know. They're investing so much in the running back position already that it kind of makes you think that they won't, pay Kenyan Drake. I think it comes down to David Johnson's health because, they still gave him a shot early in the season to be that guy. But I like how Cliff Kingsbury didn't show any allegiance to David Johnson. Once he saw he sucked, he basically relegated him to the second or third running back and made Kenyan Drake the guy. But I think that also goes to show that I think Cliff Kingsbury, when given talent, can do a lot with a little. And I know Kenyan Drake's a pretty good running back, and he was running behind a bad offensive line and still produced. So that shows how good of a running back that Kenyan Drake is. But I think if they can get somebody cheaper either through the draft or they just want to make Chase Edmonds that guy, that it makes me a little bit worried about Kenyan Drake returning to the team. But I also think just seeing what he did this past year that he's not going to go through free agency unclaimed, obviously. I think somebody's going to pick him up. Now, if that's for a starting role, I'm not so sure. He might just be another complimentary piece. So for Kenyan Drake, I don't really have an answer to this. I'm not sure if he goes back to Arizona. And if he lands somewhere else, I'm not sure if he's going to be a top-end guy. So he's not somebody that I'd buy just because there's a lot up in the air for him.
Okay, so the last guy here is Jameis Winston. Now, to me, this really would affect my opinion on Mike Evans or Chris Godwin if I was doing a draft for Dynasty now. Because in my opinion, I think they're better off with Jameis. Because Jameis will throw the ball to anyone. He'll throw it to the fucking crowd. He'll throw it to the cheerleader. He'll throw it to you. He'll throw it to the other team. He doesn't give a fuck. So I think that actually helps the receivers on the team. So where do you think he goes? Because I think he stays there. I would want him to stay there personally.
I do think he stays there. I think Jameis Winston, if it wasn't for Lamar Jackson, I think Jameis Winston would be the most interesting and most fun quarterback to watch just because every single drop back, it could be an 80-yard touchdown or it could be a pick six taken to the house. There's so much unknown about him. And I think the talent's honestly there. He has a great arm. He just doesn't have any type of mental processing to understand that if you see a guy in a different color jersey over the middle, you're not supposed to throw to them. But I think Bruce Arians, coming out of retirement and wanting to coach his team, I think he wanted to take on the challenge that was making Jameis Winston a good quarterback. And I think he's going to go to the very end trying to prove to the world that he is the quarterback whisperer and going to try to make Jameis Winston what he's supposed to be, which was the first overall pick. So I think they might just franchise tag him or whatever and bring him back for 1 year and see what Arians can do with him. And he's not even I know he's a bad quarterback, but he's not a bad quarterback. He's not the worst quarterback you could have. He still can win you games. He can definitely lose you games, but if we remember back to the Rams game, that score was ridiculous. He put up 50 points. It wasn't his fault that the defense couldn't keep LA off the field. So, I think that they bring him back. I think he's too talented to not get a job, no matter if it's in Tampa Bay or if it's somewhere else. But if he does leave and the Buccaneers are left with whatever's in free agency to get a quarterback, or if they want to draft a guy, I definitely think that hurts Mike Evans and Chris Godwin because, as you said, when you have Jameis Winston, you throw the ball 60 times a game and you see what happens. And half those throws are going to Mike Evans, half are going to Godwin. The volume would be there.
Yeah, now the only thing that really worries me is Bruce Arians seems like he could turn any quarterback around. He made Carson Palmer look very good. I don't remember what year it was, maybe 2014, 2015, but Carson Palmer looked amazing. So I think that Bruce Arians might just be fuck it, Jameis is okay. I could just bring in someone else and turn him around.
Yeah, I don't know. People are talking about Phillip Rivers going there. I think that guy is beyond done. He's probably almost as old as Bruce Arians anyways, so he's more of a peer than Bruce Arians wouldn't even be a mentor to him. So yeah, I don't know. I'd just rather them keep Jameis Winston and him try to take on the task of turning around the 101.
Okay, yeah, I think so too. I really like Jameis. I think he actually is more interesting to watch than Lamar Jackson, if I'm being honest. Because he just throws the ball to anyone. It's just crazy how his mindset works. It makes sense because he stole those crabs that one time. He thought that was okay. So why not just throw it to the guy in the wrong jersey?
Yeah, I'm not too sure what goes on upstairs with Jameis Winston. I just know that whatever he puts out on the field is a good product to watch. So every Sunday I'll tune in if he's on TV.
Exactly. Now, obviously, for here, this is the final portion of the video. Now, you can either give me your rookie rankings if you want. I'm going to give you mine for sure. I don't know if you can with the Big Dogs draft guide, if you can even give that out.
There's nothing proprietary. There's nothing I can't keep anything under wraps. It's fine. I can say whatever.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you my rankings real quick, and then maybe you could just tell me why I'm an idiot, because obviously I'm not the greatest at this. I just started. I've been watching a lot of highlight tapes, been looking at the stats, obviously, big stat.
Let me ask you something quick. When you watch a highlight tape, does the music that's playing in the background influence how you think of a player?
Oh, 100%.
Dude, it does. It's it's so stupid, but you hear a song, and if it's PNB Rock on it, I'm I don't know. I don't think this guy's going to be good in the league. But if it's somebody else, I might just be he might be a little bit better than people think.
If it's like some future shit, it like gets you going. You're like ready to run through a wall watching this guy.
If you watch DeAndre Swift put to like some future, some, Jumpman, whatever that song was a couple of years ago, like he might just be the 101 in startup drafts. Like it really has a huge influence.
Yeah, he might be the best player ever, looking at it like that.
I saw him get fitted for that gold jacket when the intro hit.
Exactly. All right, so my rankings here. My 101 would be DeAndre Swift, running back out of Georgia. My 102 is Jonathan Taylor, running back, Wisconsin. 103 is J.K. Dobbins, the Ohio State running back. 104, I got Jerry Jeudy out of Alabama. 105 is CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver, Oklahoma. My 106 is, this is a guy I actually really want to talk about, Cam Akers, running back, Florida State. Now, I saw when you guys were talking, you, Mike, and Nick, you guys were talking about Cam Akers. Now, what is your opinion on him? Like, just quick for people who don't know.
When we went into that draft, I know Mike is a huge fan of Cam Akers. He almost has him as his 101. When we were deciding draft order, Nick wanted to go first, and I told Mike, I said, you better go second because I'm going to take Cam Akers if you don't. I think he is one of the most talented running backs in this class, and that's saying a lot when you see the other guys like Swift, Taylor, Dobbins. He's basically just a mix of everything you want in a running back. He was running behind the worst like offensive line for like a notable school. I mean, there's obviously those low-end D1 schools that can't block for shit, but Florida State, which is at least used to be a decent enough program, and our friend Jameis Winston used to go there.
Yeah.
Their offensive line was like 115th out of 130 per Football Outsiders adjusted line yards. Yet as a true freshman, the dude ran for 1,000 yards this past season. I'm pretty sure he went for 1,000 yards too. He can catch the ball. He's got a good frame on him. He's not just a small guy who's going to get banged up. I think he's like, 5'10", 5'11", 215. He's extremely like athletic. He can do just basically everything. And, a huge thing for me when looking at these running back prospects and why I have him ahead of a guy like Taylor and Dobbins is at the collegiate level, all these guys look good, right? They're all put in good situations to succeed. When obviously like watching those highlight tapes or even just game film, they're going to look great because they're going up against guys who aren't in the NFL week after week. A huge thing for me in determining who I like more is the situation that they're in on their own squad. So when you think about Jonathan Taylor, right, he's on Wisconsin. Basically every running back that goes through Wisconsin does well. Maybe not to the level that Jonathan Taylor does, but whether it's Melvin Gordon, Corey Clement, James White, you name it, they had a Monty Ball. Like they all produced for Wisconsin. And I'm not taking that anything away from Jonathan Taylor's production or his talent, but I just think that you have to weigh the situation pretty, heavily when you're comparing these two guys. Even J.K. Dobbins, right, at Ohio State, he had a down year in the one season that he had an immobile quarterback in Dwayne Haskins. So maybe you got to weigh that into your analysis that maybe if he lands on a team where the quarterback is a statue, maybe if it's in Jacksonville it's not going to be Jacksonville with Leonard Fournette, but you get what I mean, like a guy like a Nick Foles or a Phillip Rivers who isn't moving, maybe that hurts J.K. Dobbins' upside. I think with Cam Akers, you just look at the fact that he was playing against pretty solid defenses. He had no offense line to block from, and he was still productive, and he was still using the passing game. He still broke off big plays. I think him doing that while having nothing to work with and nothing helping him is why I'm super high on him, because wherever he lands in the NFL is probably better than what he had in college, and he was still a great collegiate running back. And if he lands on a team that has, great blocking, whether it's Pittsburgh, Seattle, San Francisco, teams that might invest in running backs in this class, he might move up to the 101 for me.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, obviously, the fact that their line is so bad and he actually plays good is just crazy to me, especially in college.
I mean, we see that out of Joe Mixon, and that's why a lot of people are high on him going into next year is because, he's getting Jonah Williams back. He's going to have an actual quarterback, spreading the field and not having to just rely on Joe Mixon every single play. It's similar for Cam Akers, except he did it at the collegiate level. So you got to be excited for him in the NFL when he actually has guys up front that will be willing to block from week in and week out.
Now, the next guy I want to talk about is the guy I've ranked next. Now, that is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I'm not sure if I pronounced his name right. He's the LSU running back now. Obviously, I don't watch college football all that much, but from what I've seen of him, he looked crazy good. Now, I don't know why. Why is he ranked so low to a lot of people?
I'm not so sure. I'm pretty sure I heard that he has like a first or second round grade. So he's probably going to have decent enough draft capital. He's supposed to be athletic. It might just be a size thing, right? He's like 5'7", 5'8". And we saw that this year. I know he's stout. He's going to have a good BMI because he's like 210 pounds. But we saw this year with like Devin Singletary, right? I know he's not super athletic and he might not be as big, but a team just didn't want to commit to him. They didn't want to make him the goal line back. I just think that Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he might just be picked by a team that wants to use him as an accessory piece, like somebody who's just a pass catcher out of the backfield and not a goal line back. It obviously will come down to draft capital and draft like landing spot. If he's just drafted to be like an Austin Eckler 2.0, where he's like a breather back that can be used on third downs, then I think where he's being picked in rookie drafts will be warranted, like in the late first round. But if he's picked on a team that has nobody else in the backfield and he can take over the job, I mean, we saw what he did at LSU. And I know it's probably a little bit easier for him than most other running backs because he was on an incredible offense and he had a great quarterback throwing him the ball. But, if he lands in a similar situation in the NFL on a good offense that wants to utilize running backs out of the backfield, I don't have any problem picking him in like the top 3 or 4 picks because we've seen how good of a player he is. And he's not just a guy who can catch passes. He's not just like a quick guy. He is strong. He runs through people. He avoids contact when he needs to. He's extremely elusive. I'm pretty sure it was against the Auburn game. He pulled off some like ridiculous spin moves. Like he's basically a Madden player, like a creative player, just put on the field, except like a lot shorter than you probably want to make one.
Yeah, I looked it up. He's 5'8". That's not very good.
Yeah, he's not very tall.
Yeah, now the next guys in my rankings, I got at the 108, I got T. Higgins, wide receiver, Clemson. 109, Justin Jefferson, wide receiver, LSU. 110, Brian Edwards, wide receiver, South Carolina. And then at 111, I got Henry Ruggs III, wide receiver, Alabama. Now, what do you think about Henry Ruggs III? Because any guy that has a third in their name is pretty cool to me. So
I don't know. He might just hold out like Melvin Gordon the third, or Todd Gurley the third, whatever. They all want money. Yeah. I'm not too high on Henry Ruggs, like at all. I think the only thing going from, obviously he's a good football player. He made it to Alabama. You got to be good at football to play for Alabama, but he was basically fourth. I'm not sure if it was fourth or third in receiving. He's definitely behind Devonta Smith and Jerry Jeudy in receiving. And obviously want to say, oh, those guys are really good receivers. That's not fair to put that against him. But you want to see somebody who you're picking in the first round and, is going to have some draft capital. You want to see some sort of production out of him. The guy never hit any sort of threshold to have a breakout age, which obviously analytically doesn't bode well for his success in the NFL. And the guy you have ranked next, Jalen Reger, a lot of people have that debate between those two. I think Jalen Reger's a better athlete than Ruggs. I think he's better in every facet of the receiving game. Maybe Ruggs is a little bit more physical, but if you're just weighing it out and you have physicality on Ruggs' side and you have athleticism, production relative to situation, probably similar draft capital, everything's going to be in Jalen Reger's favor. I don't know. I'm not too big of a fan on Ruggs, and I know a lot of people are, and I don't wish any like ill will towards any of these players. I don't hope that they fail. It's just personally, he's somebody I'm not going to draft just because there isn't enough evidence for me to back up my pick. And if he does bust, I would know that I picked him just because I thought he was good rather than actually going through like the history of analytics or whatever and knowing there's probably a better chance he's going to bust than him not busting.
So like you said, my 112, the final guy I've ranked here is Jalen Reger, wide receiver of TCU. Now, why do you like him so much? Like, could you give me I know you kind of just said it, but.
Watch his highlight tape. I don't know what song is playing in the background. I don't think it matters. This guy is basically Odell Beckham Jr. all over again, and that is extremely high praise. I get it. But he does everything you want on a football field. He'll return kicks. He'll return punts. He's incredible after the catch. He makes some ridiculous grabs. I'm pretty sure the guy's going to have at least like a 42-inch vertical. I know in high school he like set the not state, but like the nation record in like long jump. He's just an athletic freak who's probably going to run the 4.3s. His spark score is going to be incredible. He was playing with a bunch of different quarterbacks. I think he had like 6 quarterbacks throughout his 3 years in college, some ridiculous number. TC was just garbage. They never got him the ball. And despite that, right, he broke out at 18 years old, which is very good. He had a really high dominator rating, which I know in that like little model that I use to predict the breakout, he checks basically every single box. And I just think that similar with Akers, where you're not put in a good situation to succeed and you still do, I weigh that very heavily. And the fact that he played for TCU and was facing, not great defense, but he was facing, decent enough competition, that him still doing well despite everything working against him is why I am very high on a guy like Reger, who I think has extreme upside with the athleticism that he has. And if landing on the right offense, like a Green Bay or like a Philly, I think he could be a legit wide receiver one in fantasy a couple years down the road.
Okay. Now, are there any guys that I don't have listed that you really like or no?
Well, you do have Brian Edwards. I like him a lot. I do like Laviska Shenault. I warmed up to him a bit. I know the injuries are you kind of get nervous about it, but it was nothing recurring. I looked a little bit more into it while I was doing the draft guide. It was like a turf toe one time. It was a core muscle injury another time. It's not like he was consistently like tearing an ACL or his foot injury was recurring. And, you might be nervous about turf toe, but we saw Devonta Adams this past year suffer a turf toe, and he did incredible in the playoffs just, not even a year later, just a couple months later. So I wouldn't weigh that too heavily. I think if a team drafts him to be what he is, and that's kind of like a huge gadget player, somebody you can use in the screen game, out of the backfield, all around, I think he can be like an extremely exciting piece. Not that he's ever going to be like a wide receiver one in fantasy, but he can give you Percy Harvin type numbers where, for 1 or 2 seasons, he was extremely fantasy viable, kind of like a Deebo Samuel also, somebody who can, if they're not catching passes, they're being used out of the backfield and they just can give it to you however you want it. So he's somebody I'm pretty high on. As for like a first round pick, I think I picked him at the 112 in our mock draft, but I actually forgot about a player, and that was Tyler Johnson. He would have probably been my 112 if I had went back and redone it. He's another guy. He had like a 90-something percentile breakout age and college dominator. He's basically just Devontae Adams reincarnate. He's an incredible route runner. Actually, it reminds me a lot of Keenan Allen, too. He's just extremely good off the line, and I think that'll translate well to the NFL. And I know he stayed for a senior year, which is kind of a knock on him, but he still put up like 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns for Minnesota, who is a very good collegiate team this past season. So he's another guy I'm really high on the wide receiver position.
Okay, now who's your favorite wide receiver coming out here? Because a lot of people will say either Lamb or Judy. Who do you prefer? Or maybe it's neither of those guys.
It's Reger. But between those two, between Lamb and Judy, it's weird because I think that off the bat, I think Judy's going to have a better, first season in the NFL, a better rookie season because I think he's a little bit more pro-ready. He's like what teams look for, just like a good route runner or whatever. He's going to get himself open. I think Lamb is more so like what N'Keal Harry was last year. Not that he's like a project, but I think you need to try to scheme him open a bit more and let his game develop. He's really good down the field at tracking the ball. I'm not so sure how well his athleticism is going to allow him to do that, at least in his first year before he picks up, like the nuance of the game, winning battles off the line of scrimmage. So me personally, I think I would rather have Lamb, but I wouldn't be too worried about his upside if he doesn't start off hot, fresh off of like right away. But you never know. He could be like A.J. Brown and just be incredible, even though he was seen as a little bit more of a raw prospect as well. So I could totally be wrong. But either way, I think I would take Lamb higher than Judy in any type of circumstance.
Okay. Now, this is my last question now. For Joe Burrow, obviously he's a guy that in like 2 quarterback leagues, super flex leagues, he's going to be drafted highly in the rookie draft. Now, what do you think he does, just talking about really just next year? Do you think that he could really make Cincinnati as good as a lot of people think he could, like I do?
Yeah, I think he's going to be a fantastic fantasy quarterback. If you think about Daniel Jones this past year, right? The dude sucks. Yeah, like I don't care if you're a Giants fan or not. He turns the ball over way too much for me to have any sort of confidence in him even like securing a second contract. I think he had like 22 turnovers combined with his like fumbles and interceptions. He's basically just a better version of Daniel Jones, and we saw Daniel Jones be very fantasy relevant, and that was a lot to do because of Saquon Barkley was there, Evan Ingram got injured, but he was there for a little bit. They had good weapons, Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard, you name it. They had guys all over the field, and I think it's a similar situation in Cincinnati where they have Mixon out of the backfield who, although he's not using the passing game a lot, we know he's a decent enough pass catcher. They have Tyler Boyd, even John Ross and A.J. Green. Like, he has enough weapons for him to have good fantasy output with just his arm alone, and we saw him in college run for a ton of yards, right? He averaged over 20 yards a game rushing, which may not seem like a lot, but in college you get negative yards for every time you're sacked. So you see some players have like 190 yards and like 7 rushing touchdowns. You got to take in consideration that a lot of those yards were taken away because they got sacked a lot. So I think he's going to test out fairly well athletically, and I think he'll be able to run in the NFL, which is obviously going to help his floor, similar to what we saw to Daniel Jones. But I think the weapons are there for him to be a very relevant fantasy quarterback, even in redraft leagues for next year. Somebody's probably either going to go undrafted or go really late that can be a huge steal for you.
Yeah, I think Joe Burrow, unlike Daniel Jones, will actually not have fumbling problems like Danny fumbles.
Yeah, if you can just be more, not so much of a game manager, but maybe not as much of an idiot, I think that'll help him in the long term, and it'll also help him for fantasy football, having longer drives, having more touchdown drives. And even Daniel Jones, despite all those turnovers and despite, I think the Giants ranked 30th in time of possession, he was still like the QB 12 on a point per game basis. So I think that shows a window into how good Joe Burrow really could be next year.
Okay, now last question, actually. This is the real last question. Now, obviously, in the BDG Slack chat, you guys can join that. I'll link that down below. But you were talking about how you don't really like the tight ends this year. Is there any reason why or no?
No, I was kind of like kidding around. I just say that if Scott's around there because he's in like all my leagues and I don't want to give him any advice.
He won't watch this. No,
Yeah. Scott, if you're watching, send me an offer. I really haven't looked into too many tight ends. Because last year, at least in the draft guide, I wrote up a bunch of receivers. This year, I'm going to do a little bit more. We're going to do running backs, receivers, and like a bunch of different positions, but I just have personally a lot more fun watching receivers and running backs, so I didn't really get into the tight ends too much. I did watch some Adam Troutman. He's like from a small school. I think he's going to be pretty solid, and I guess he did pretty well at the Senior Bowl. There's a couple other names like Cole Kmet, those Bryant guys, Harrison and Hunter Bryant. I haven't watched them, so I can't speak on their ability or what I think they'll be in the league. But as for this class, from what I've heard, it's not as good as last class was. So I'm not too sure if we should be too high on them.
Okay. Actually, here's the final question. Now, do you let the combine really change your opinion on these guys? Because to me, I normally don't let the combine completely sway how I think of a guy. But I typically base mine off of what does the guy look like without a shirt on, like DK Metcalf, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. You would have done pretty well in this year's fantasy draft if you did that. But I think it's a common sentiment that you should only take into consideration the combine if somebody tests either a lot better or a lot worse than you thought that they would. And I agree with that, because if you watch, for example, a guy like Devin Duvernay, who's he might not be a smaller name guy to a lot of people, but maybe to the more casual dynasty player or whatever, you may not know who he is. He's an extremely fast guy out of Texas. If he runs a 4.3, I'm not going to move him up my boards because I know he's a fast guy out of Texas. If he runs a 4.5, I'm just not drafting him, because a huge part of his game is speed. He played in the Big 12, so obviously the defenses there just close their eyes and hopefully they bat a pass down, which isn't going to be the case in the NFL unless they're playing the Dolphins. I'm sorry about that. But if, say, T. Higgins, right, a guy who isn't the fastest guy, but he's a big physical guy, if he goes out and runs a 4.38, which whatever, he's obviously somebody that would move up draft boards because he is a lot more athletic than you may think. And although he didn't show it on tape, he has the potential to translate that to the NFL. So, but then again, if you just don't think a player is good at all, somebody last year who I wasn't a fan of at all was Miles Boykin. I just thought the dude was, he didn't do anything till his senior year. He didn't look athletic on tape, but then he goes out and runs a 4.42. I said that he reminded me of Andrew Wiggins, a guy who we know is athletic, but when he plays basketball, the dude doesn't use it. I think it's the same with a bunch of guys where if on tape you don't see them, trying to high point balls, using that vertical leap that they test at, or just beating guys down the field with that speed. If that's just not in their mentality during the game, then I'm not so sure it's going to translate as easily to the NFL. So I think the combine is fun just to watch and see how fast these guys run, and maybe it's something that you can use in between a Dobbins and a Taylor if you want to use that as a separator because you have them equal in every other facet of the game. Sure, that's cool, but I don't think it's something you should weigh too heavily into your analysis.
Okay. All right. Now, obviously, we're going to come into the end here. Now, I'm going to move up Reger in my rankings, and I'll talk to some other people about it. Now, I'm going to go after this. I'm going to go watch some Jumpman highlights of Reger playing. But thank you, Noah, for coming on, a.k.a. Patrick Mahomes. He's looking good over here.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. It was fun to talk about a little Dynasty.
All right. Thank you very much to Noah. Noah's links, everything will be in the description. You can say anything you want here.
I don't really have anything to say. Subscribe to Notorious Fantasy. Probably some more Dynasty content coming out. He might update you on a team that he drafted through our Slack channel. I know he said he'll put the Slack channel in the description. If you guys want to check that out, that's pretty cool. It's more of a community. It's completely free if you guys just want to talk, just bullshit about rookie picks or what you're going to do with your team, or if you want any type of roster advice. On our weekly videos on Nick Ercolano's channel, where we'll break down some rosters, roster advice, trade advice. But, overall, just be a part of the community. Just, I don't know, if you want to join the Slack channel, go for it. If you don't, no hard feelings.
No, go fuck yourself if you don't join. Okay. But if you guys actually do want to join that, that's how I joined the Dynasty League. So it's actually very easy in there. There's a lot of guys in there that will play with you, and they're guys that are going to play hard. And it's not going to be some shit where you join and then half the guys don't even care. So.
Yeah, it's set up pretty easily so you guys can find how to join a league, where to pay. It's a third-party type of thing, so you don't have to worry about some random guy running off with your buy-in. So it's pretty safe all around. You get to meet new people. You get to join a league if you haven't played Dynasty before that you've never been a part of. So it's a pretty cool experience, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely, guys, join that. Thank you guys all for watching. I love you all. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye, guys.